Welcome to It's About Time, where we like to uncover the legacy of the past in short stories. Please subscribe for more content and let's dig in. History remembers her as the Blood Countess, a terrifying woman, condemned to die within her own castle walls in the 17th century for the unspeakable crimes she committed. Beauty, power, trauma, and murder. Elizabeth Báthory was the darkest serial killer in European history, as she tortured and killed almost 600 young virgin girls and used their blood for a perverse beauty obsession. The darkest monster in history had a sadistic childhood, a miscarriage at 14, and witnessed torture and executions as she grew up. Let's decode this dark legend together for the next 10 minutes. It's about time, a child of power and shadows. Elizabeth Báthory was born in 1560 into one of the most powerful Protestant dynasties of Hungary. The Báthory family controlled vast swaths of Transylvania, their influence stretching far across the region. From birth, Elizabeth was surrounded by privilege, yet also by violence. She grew up in the Čachtice Castle, where public executions were as common as feasts, and where cruelty was not hidden, but celebrated as power. In a world already soaked in brutality, Elizabeth was nurtured in its very heart. For her, pain was not foreign or shocking, it was ordinary. But there's another factor in her genetics that might explain her later psychotic behavior. It seems that intermarriage with blood relatives was favored by the Báthory family as a way of preserving the purity of the bloodline. Of course, today, we know that blood-related marriages pose an increased risk for offspring to suffer congenital malformations and recessive diseases, as well as physical illnesses. A child of blood-related parents is at increased risk of psychoses and severe personality disorders. Marriage into darkness. At 15, Elizabeth was released from her family to be married to Count Ferenc Nadasdy, a soldier feared by his enemies on the battlefield. As a wedding gift, she received Čachtice Castle, a looming fortress in what is now Slovakia. What should have been a fairy tale marriage instead became the perfect union of two cruel hearts. Count Ferenc was very talented in designing torture devices for both punishment and amusement, introducing Elizabeth to methods that transformed cruelty into entertainment. Their castle's dungeons became theaters of agony, where the suffering of servants and peasants provided a grim spectacle for their amusement using torture tools, such as the Iron Maidens and Judah's chairs, anything to inflict the most agonizing, most unimaginable level of pain to the victims. Even when her husband was away at war, Elizabeth did not abandon these pastimes. She refined them, practicing new torments with the help of confidants, such as her childhood nurse, her aunt who dabbled in witchcraft and orgies, and a dwarf servant named Fichko. Together, they cultivated an atmosphere where violence was as casual as conversation, a reputation for savagery. The 16th century lacked compassion, but Elizabeth's reputation for cruelty shocked her peers. Witnesses would later claim she bit the flesh of girls, stabbed them with needles, burned them with heated irons or coins, and beat them until they could no longer move. Some victims were smeared in honey and left outside to be ravaged by insects. Elizabeth recorded much of this in her own diary, noting how long each form of torment could prolong agony before death. Her meticulous nature turned cruelty into something resembling scientific study. Though the purpose was not knowledge, it was pleasure, the obsession with youth. For years, Elizabeth lived a life of indulgence without consequence. But time is relentless, even for the powerful. In her early 40s, she began to notice signs of aging in the mirror. Wrinkles crept across the skin she once treasured. According to legend, the revelation came during an outburst of anger. A maid brushed her hair too harshly, and in a fit of rage, Elizabeth struck her. The girl's blood splashed onto the Countess's hand. Later, Elizabeth thought the skin where the blood had touched looked smoother, more luminous. From this moment, myth and reality became tangled. Elizabeth came to believe that the blood of virgins could restore her fading beauty. Whether or not she truly bathed in her victims' blood, she undeniably escalated her killings, seeking ever more victims to satisfy her vanity. The hunt for victims. At first, the victims were drawn from the lowest classes, peasant girls lured to the castle with promises of work. They were trapped in underground chambers, tortured, and discarded like broken dolls. But as the years passed, Elizabeth grew bolder. She began targeting daughters of lesser nobility, offering them opportunities to study refinement at Čachtice Castle. The ruse worked, for what parent would refuse an invitation from one of the most powerful women in Hungary? The disappearances multiplied. Villages whispered of the horrors within the Countess's fortress. Parents hid their daughters when Elizabeth's servants came searching. Fear crept across the countryside like fog. Discovery of the atrocities. For years, Elizabeth's social status shielded her from suspicion, but eventually, the number of vanished girls became too great to ignore. The breaking point came when a young nobleman, desperate to find his missing beloved, infiltrated the castle. What he discovered was a nightmare. Bodies piled in corners, girls half dead in chains, and the unmistakable stench of decay. When word reached authorities, even the King of Hungary, Matthias II, could no longer look away. In 1610, soldiers stormed Čachtice Castle. The dungeons revealed a scene so horrific it entered legend. Wounded girls, corpses awaiting disposal, and a countess who seemed more interested in wine and cruelty than in her fate. The trial. Elizabeth and her accomplices were arrested in 1611. Dozens of witnesses came forward to testify against her, recounting scenes of unimaginable brutality. Her servants confessed to aiding her, admitting to around 80 murders. Yet Elizabeth's private diary suggested far more. A staggering 650 names were said to be recorded within its pages. Her accomplices faced swift and brutal justice. They were beheaded or burned at the stake, condemned as witches and monsters. But Elizabeth's noble birth shielded her from the same fate. The idea of burning a countess was unthinkable. Instead, her punishment was slower, more suffocating. Entombment. Elizabeth was bricked inside a chamber of her own castle. The windows were sealed, the doors closed with stone and mortar, leaving only a small slit through which food and water could be passed. There, within walls that had echoed with the cries of her victims, Elizabeth spent her final years in silence and isolation. No screams of the tortured, no extravagant celebrations, only her own thoughts, circling endlessly like vultures in a small dark room. She died in 1614, at the age of 54. Myth and politics. But was Elizabeth truly the most prolific female serial killer of all time, or a victim of a political plot? Some historians argue that her crimes were exaggerated by rivals eager to seize her vast wealth and lands, following the death of her husband. Others point to King Matthias himself, who owed the Countess a considerable debt that vanished conveniently with her imprisonment. Her story is further clouded by embellishments added long after her death. The notorious image of Elizabeth bathing in blood first appeared 2 centuries later, in the writings of a German biographer. The myth was sensational enough to endure, transforming her from a cruel noblewoman into a vampiric icon of horror. The legacy. Today, Čachtice Castle lies in ruins, visited by tourists who walk among its crumbling stones and whisper the name of the Blood Countess. She has been immortalized in books, films, operas, and video games. Her legend blends fact and fiction until they are inseparable. A warning, a fascination, and a symbol of the monstrous potential hidden behind beauty and privilege. Whether she truly murdered 600 girls, or whether enemies exaggerated her deeds to strip her of power, Elizabeth Báthory remains one of history's most terrifying figures. She is the embodiment of cruelty concealed beneath layers of luxurious fabrics, and vanity turned into dark violence, as well as the result of a disturbing childhood. And perhaps that is why her story endures. Because it is not just the tale of one woman's descent into darkness, but also a mirror reflecting the corruption of power, the dangers of obsession and trauma, and the ease with which humanity slips into horror. Thank you for watching. Please leave a comment for feedback, and press subscribe to support the channel so we can uncover more captivating stories. It's about time.